Okay, I'm not sure why that happened on the phone. So just to conclude the message with the halacha is, so the question was, if we're relying on Shemaya Ka'oneh, how are we accomplishing that when the person's making the brachas on the Aliyah, that they're actually there, they're actually doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is reading, because in the ancient times, the way Kriyas HaTorah was done was that each person who was making his aliyah would lane, and so he's saying the brachas on his laning. Actually, the original way was only the first aliyah said the first bracha, and then each reader came up and laned their aliyah without saying any brachas, and then whoever had achron would recite the ending bracha at the end, and that is the way that Kriyas HaTorah was done. It was only later in history that the brachas were added before and after each aliyah, just in case people would be leaving in the middle of Kriyas HaTorah, and so that's why we have this. And so, for this reason, though, what essentially is done is that still the person has to read along, and the job of the Bal Koreh is really just to lane. There's actually brought in Shulchan Aruch, and the Ramah brings, actually, that if, let's say, you don't have anyone knows really how to lane, but they could actually follow along, the Bal Koreh should lane from a Chumash with Nekudas and Tamim, printed in the Chumash, and the Oila goes up in lanes quietly to himself, following along in the Sefer Torah, and the Bal Koreh doesn't have to know by heart how to lane, because he can lane right from the Chumash. The problem is, do we know the people who are Oila actually know how to follow along? Meaning to say, we're relying on Shemaya Ka'oneh, because sometimes we give an aliyah to someone who doesn't even know Aleph Beis, and they can't really follow along in the laning, and we still give them an aliyah even though they're not reading along, even though you're supposed to be reading along. And so again, we rely on Shemaya Ka'oneh. And also, furthermore, this reliance on Shemaya Ka'oneh here works both ways. Meaning, if we're going to say that the Bal Koreh himself should make the brachas, so we could, and he should take all 7 aliyahs, let's say, so then he can rely on Shemaya Ka'oneh, that the other person who's saying the brachas is being moitze him on the Shemaya Ka'oneh of the brachas. So Mimon of Shach, the way Rabbi Fishbein sees is that this is how we're going to operate in our shul. Obviously, every shul and every other location should follow their own Rav and their own Psak. But essentially, what we're planning to do in Mirz Hashem this Shabbos is, if we have at least 16, if we have just 10, we don't know exactly who's up, who's coming up, who's going to come to shul. If we have exactly 10, we're going to have 1 minyan. If we have at least 16 to 20, then we'll have 2 minyanim, meaning if we have 6 more people who didn't daven, 4 people from the first minyan will have to stay at the second minyan, and each minyan will be less than an hour. We'll just up daven very quickly. Anyway, there's a minig on this Shabbos to daven quickly. It's an old Ashkenaz minig because of a lot of the korbanos that happened during the Crusades in the days of Sfira, particularly this week in Sfira, to have a more muted type of Shabbos where you daven very quickly. So there is actually an ancient source, or at least a centuries-old source for davening quickly on this particular Shabbos, but we'll have to halt zechazoi until things return more to normal. But essentially, that's the way we're going to handle it. If we have more than 20 men who want to daven with the minyan, we'll have to have already 26, and again, 6 who are davening Shisha Mispalim, and then 4 from previous minyanim to stay. So we'll see how many people are around first. We don't have a set time yet, and obviously we're not advertising the exact time, because anybody who's coming have to be from the minuyim. They have to already essentially be chosen who's going to be participating in this, and so we'll communicate with the Rav directly. But we're happy that things are slowly going back to normal. Now, then the question comes to the constitutional issue, and it's not necessarily just because, meaning, it's not that we're doing this because, and the Constitution protects our ways to daven however we want. So the thing is that the major organizations like the Aguda and the OU and the and RCA, even if we don't necessarily agree with them all the time, they have instructed this is what we should want, and not only that, but other Rabbanim who are not part of those organizations have also recommended that this is what we should want, this is how we should want to daven. The Rav himself is not going to be coming down to daven as his own choice, and I'll tell you, I myself, because of my position at work, I prefer this method of following these guidelines, because there was a concern in my job if we are allowed to go and be around people without social distancing and so forth, and so this could jeopardize my work. For example, I work in 2 different institutions usually, and full-time and the part-time. The full-time position told me you can only pick one. So obviously you're going to pick the full-time over the part-time, but they would not permit me to enter the institution if I was still visiting the other institution. And my bosses at work said they wondered if that applied to religious service as well, which doesn't seem to, but still that is a concern that they have. And so it's not that we're doing this al-tam because the government is recommending this to us, because if they would enforce it, it would be illegal and unconstitutional. And the things that they're doing right now are illegal and unconstitutional, breaking up the bigger shuls that choose to follow their rabbonim in a different way. And those shuls have every right to follow their rabbonim, who allow bigger groups. That's their prerogative, to follow their own das Torah. But this is the choice that we are making for whatever reason, and we feel justified in following in this way, maintaining social distancing with minyan, and so we will insist that people do cover their faces, whether it's with a mask or a scarf or with their talis or whatever it is. So Eibishter should be Makabel our tefillas, brach and ratzon, and everything should be good. Kultiv.